Chapter 18, Paul goes to Corinth. After this, Paul left Athens in Greece and went to Corinth. There he met a Jew named Aquila, a native of Pontus, who had recently come from Italy, and his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had ordered all Jews to leave Rome. Paul went to see them, and because he was a tent maker as they were, he stayed and he worked with them. Paul often would not want to be a burden in the cities where he would plant churches, so he would be a tent maker and he would work during the day. I say this, a small group leader at night and a pastor and a preacher on Sundays. Paul didn't want to be a burden. It was his joy to share the gospel. Verse 4. Every Sabbath he reasoned in the synagogue, trying to persuade Jews and Greeks. He would go to church. He would try to lead people to Christ. Verse 5. When Silas and Timothy came from Macedonia from Greece, Paul devoted himself exclusively to preaching, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was the Messiah. But when they opposed Paul and became abusive, he shook out his clothes in protest and said to them, "Your blood be on your own heads. I am innocent of it. From now on, I will go to the Gentiles." He had tried to share the gospel with the Jews, to the Jews first, and then to the Gentiles. Many Jews were resistant. He said, fine, I'm moving on. I'm going to go share it with the Gentiles. Verse 7. Then Paul left the synagogue and went next door to the house of Titius Justus, a worshiper of God. Crispus, the synagogue leader, and his entire household believed in the Lord, and many of the Corinthians who heard Paul believed and were baptized. One night the Lord spoke to Paul in a vision. "Do not be afraid. Keep on speaking. Do not be silent, for I am with you, and no one is going to attack and harm you, because I have many people in this city." So Paul stayed in Corinth for a year and a half, teaching them the word of God. For a year and a half. What an incredible amount of time. From Paul's life and his journey, that's a long time for Paul to be somewhere. He had a very effective work that took place. He would write multiple letters to Corinth. There would be troubles and challenges with this church along the way. There was correction he had to introduce, but God had opened up a great door for effective work in the city of Corinth. Verse 12. While Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews of Corinth made a united attack against Paul and brought him to the place of judgment. This man they charged of persuading the people to worship God in ways contrary to the law. What's new? He's in front of the leadership again with false accusations. Just as Paul was about to speak, Gallio said to them, "If you Jews were making a complaint about some misdemeanor or serious crime, it would be reasonable for me to listen to you. But since it involves questions about words and names in your own law, settle the matter yourselves. I will not be a judge of such things." So he drove them off. Then the crowd there turned on Sosthenes, the synagogue leader, and beat him in front of the proconsul. And Gallio showed no concern whatsoever. Verse 18. Your heading might say Priscilla, Aquila, and Apollos. Paul stayed on in Corinth for some time. Then he left the brothers and sisters and sailed for Syria, accompanied by Priscilla and Aquila. Before he sailed, he had his hair cut off at Cenchreae because of a vow he had taken. They arrived at Ephesus, where Paul left Priscilla and Aquila. Ephesus, another church. The letter to Ephesians, or the church at Ephesus. So cool how Acts shows us the journey as he would plant these churches. When they asked him to plant more time with them, he declined, but as he left, he promised, "I will come back if it is God's will." Then he set sail from Ephesus. When he landed at Caesarea, he went up to Jerusalem and greeted the church, and then went down to Antioch. After spending some time in Antioch, Paul set out from there and traveled from place to place throughout the region of Galatia and Phrygia, strengthening all the disciples. He would go back and visit the churches that he had started, and he would strengthen them. He was an apostolic leader. He would strengthen the churches and plant churches. Meanwhile, a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was a learned man with thorough knowledge of the scriptures. He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and he spoke with great fervor, or great passion or zeal in the Spirit of God. And he had been instructed in the way of the Lord. He taught about Jesus accurately, though he knew only the baptism of John. He began to speak boldly in the synagogue. When Priscilla and Aquila heard about him, they invited him to their home and explained to him the way of God more adequately. When Apollos wanted to go to Achaia, the brothers and sisters encouraged him and wrote the disciples there to welcome him. When he arrived, he was a great help to those who by grace had believed, for he vigorously refuted his Jewish opponents in public debate, proving from the scriptures that Jesus was the Messiah. Paul is traveling. Paul is going from place to place, strengthening up and developing young leaders in the faith, men and women. He was raising up the next generation of the church. Such a beautiful picture that we see how from generation to generation, the church is raising up the next generation. I love how my father taught it to me. He said, the next generation is not our replacement. They're our reinforcement. We don't need to be jealous of them, and they don't need to be envious of us. We are working together from generation to generation because it's not about us. It's about Christ. Be blessed today.